Hello again, and welcome to our follow-up Forum for a Better Understanding to last week's program. I hope you are here when we gave you the history of how it is that the Fresno City has an Office of Independent Review based on 25 years of hard work to bring a reviewer to the police actions here in our city. Today we have a different panel, and they're going to be discussing 11 questions that are being posed by the Central California Criminal Justice Commission that has been meeting for more than 10 years over this very project. Our three guests would be, first of all, Eddie Aubrey, who has been the independent reviewer of the Fresno Police Department since November of 2009. And we want to thank you, Eddie, not only for being here, but for your review of those first 6 months of your tenure. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Jim.
Across from me over here would be my friend Gerry Bill, who is a professor emeritus of sociology and American studies at Fresno City. We are so lucky to fit in Gerry between India and Peru. He's a world traveler, but is very committed as the co-chair of the CCCJC that he would be here today to make this program possible. And across from me directly is Rebeca Rangel, who is with Gerry, the co-chair of this Central California Criminal Justice Committee, and has been involved for more than 10 years at the long, arduous work of bringing this to fruition. I wonder if you could all just make an opening statement that would let us know what you hope happens in this particular program today. Eddie, what is your hope?
Well, my hope is, and the reason why I came on the program is to be another part of community outreach. I think that is very key here to have the community outreach, to have collaboration and discussion, and also let folks know exactly what the Office of Independent Review does and how it can actually help the community and provide that transparency and collaboration in the community.
Thanks, Eddie, very much. Gerry, why are we here today?
Yes, well, in last week's show, Walt Perry referred to this as a relay race, and the race is continuing. We're not to the finish line. We're here to see that we can improve upon this first step in police oversight. We'd like to see stronger police oversight with investigative powers and so on, but we're not there yet, but we're somewhere at least, and we're looking at how can we improve upon things from here.
Thanks, Gerry. Rebecca.
Well, it's really a combination of what Eddie and Gerry both said, which is to continue to grow the collaboration, but also to expand the OIR and help it to grow stronger and, of course, remain and hopefully expand his staff so that he can continue on the hard work that he's doing in the community.
Thanks very much for being here. Now we're going to take you to a clip. I went to a meeting of the Central California Criminal Justice Committee in December of 2010, and 11 questions were posed. Let's look at the first question from Rangel, and let's see what Eddie's response might be.
Aubrey, as a citizen, as a listener to this program, I'm sure that the citizens would like to know, in your first mid-year report that you put out, do you believe the things you highlighted in that report as needing improvement will be adequately addressed by the appropriate authorities, and what more needs to be done?
Eddie, that's for you.
All right. Well, the first report, the mid-year report, was, I think, a very good report that actually highlighted some specific focus issues. And that first focus issue was, of course, the lengthy delay in the officer-involved shootings back from 2004. There were 46 cases that remained open, and that was a concern, and that's what the report addressed. The second part of that was the complaint intake and internal tracking system. And I think it highlighted that in order to have the confidence and integrity, you have to have information from the beginning of intake from a complaint all the way through the process, and that the citizens feel that they are part of that process. So those recommendations were made, certain recommendations were made to those issues there, and it went to the city manager. And as far as, for example, the tracking issue, the city manager in council said that the software program that I had recommended and looked at and reviewed from other agencies was something that he would recommend. And that software will go ahead and track from the beginning, but added with that software will be some changes to policies and procedures that go in line with that software so it can track from the very beginning to the very end. The other thing about the officer-involved shootings is that when this was highlighted and brought to bear, the department made some internal changes, which I was part of those discussions about how to proceed when an officer-involved shooting begins, the process it takes so that they can complete their portion of the investigation in a timely manner. Because we saw that on average it took 39 months to complete an officer-involved shooting. And the statistics from other agencies are well under 12. They're more like about 9 or 10 months.
Boy.
So that's one of the things that you can highlight. The good thing about this, even though I provide the recommendations, those recommendations go up to the city manager, who, of course, in the mayor's office, and it goes to the chief, and the chief has a period of time that he has to respond back to those recommendations and go ahead, and then the city manager, being the chief executive officer, can go ahead and look at that and deem whether or not it's appropriate or what needs to be done, or if it needs to be changed, or if the recommendations were perfect. So that's, I mean, it's a good accountability system because it does provide information for everyone to see out there and for the city to go ahead and take a look at and say, what are we doing about accountability in this?
Do either one of you have a follow-up comment, or was that enough for right now?
That's good.
Second question comes from Ellie Bluestein, who was just here in the previous program. Let's see what Ellie had to ask Eddie.
Report to the city council, you mentioned that you felt you needed to reach out more to the community. Have you done that, and what groups have you contacted?
Eddie.
All right, and that's, again, like I said in the first question, that the community outreach is a very important part. And I've spoken to a lot of different groups, including the CCCJC, League of Women Voters, University Fresno, Kiwanis, Mayor's Town Hall meetings, just last week, CERT, and public events. I'm working with council members right now, especially the new council members, to go ahead and have town hall meetings so that we can have those in various areas. And that's what we're working on right now. In fact, I met with council members last week. The concerns that they've told me in the various groups, number one, are the access and transparency of information. Is the information really the information? And then are we able to see that? And that has to be kept in check with, of course, the Police Officer Bill of Rights and labor laws. But still, what kind of information can we see? And the big thing is whether I'm getting access to that information. And I have total unfettered access to all of the information in the police department, and they've been very cooperative with that. But one of the things that I'm looking at is, of course, the communication and dialogue with the police department and the community. I think that by far is the key, and that's why I go back to that community outreach piece.
Any comment from the panel?
Well, yeah, I just want to say, I'm glad that Eddie has unfettered access to the information. We as the public don't have that access. And unfortunately, correct me if I'm wrong, Eddie, but I think, even when you issue a report, if there's something in there that the city manager doesn't want in there or the city attorney says shouldn't be in there, it has to be taken out, which means, it creates a question in some people's minds. Are we getting the full story or not? Or is your report being censored in some way?
Right. And just to let you know that when I write the reports, they are what they are. They're not being censored out or anything. I write them in a format that hopefully abides by labor laws and the Peace Officer Bill of Rights. But what I write in those reports are not censored at all. I mean, I write what I write, and I hold that to a highest standard to make sure that my report is my report, and nothing gets censored out of it.
Just a little footnote to what Gerry brought up, and that is the whole purpose of the existence of Central California Criminal Justice Committee has been precisely for oversight into what's going on when there are questionable activities on behalf of the police. And that just a little bit of a red flag in my brain, Eddie, when you say, the Officers' Bill of Rights and the PD, because then what exactly, you say it's solely what you think, but so what would that be? If it upsets them, is it going to be taken out of the report?
That hasn't happened.
That hasn't happened?
No.
Excellent for starting with two very short but very important questions. Now, a third one, believe it or not, comes from Rebeca herself, who was at the meeting. So let's see what she said that evening in December.
Number 3. Mr. Aubrey, can you tell us the number of complaints you've received and what kind of complaints?
Well, the kinds of complaints that I've received are predominantly about use of force, I mean excessive force. And those complaints actually are about 1/3 of the total complaints that actually come in, especially, and I'm only talking about the first 6 months of the year.
Yep.
Because that's what I can look at. 1/3 of those complaints are the use of force complaints. The other 2/3 of the complaints have actually been about policy, procedure, professionalism, respect, rudeness, poor performance by officers, as I said, professionalism, failure to provide information. And I think in our last show, that was one of those things that the officers in that time didn't provide information to why they were stopped or provide their identity. And they're also about charges. And honestly, some folks, they want the charges dismissed if they have criminal charges. And they've been pretty frank with me and said that. But the thing about it is, one of the things that I noticed from looking at the statistics and looking at the numbers in the cases, about 40% of the complaints actually come from within the department. Internally, the department generates those complaints. Those are about 40%. The other 60% come from the public and the citizens there. I've had people either call in by the phone, come in, and that's been great. I've noticed, though, that unusually that a lot of folks are using the internet, which is great, email, and it comes either through our office or to the mayor's office or to the city managers, and we get that. But I found that to be a little bit unusual that I would get so many by email. But that's great, and if it works, it works. Whatever means is necessary is wonderful by me. And then when I meet with people that come in, they want to have questions about the policies, procedures, about where the complaint is, how it's going, and then I talk with them about that. And many times, and not many times, sometimes they actually say that, okay, thank you for letting me know what the procedures are, and I'm fine with this. And I said, well, no, you can still, if you still have an issue, we need to go ahead and file a complaint and let the process go. But they said, well, no one's explained it and talked to me about the case. And that's where I come back to the community outreach piece again, and the communication and meaningful dialogue.
You know, we're going to take a break, but before we take our break, I wonder if either Gerry or Rebecca want to pursue any more this one question, which was yours at that meeting, Rebecca.
Just a tiny question, and that would be, are we going to at some point get sort of a statistical breakdown on, say, X number of complaints come to you via email, telephone, et cetera? In terms of giving the community a sense of how the bulk of the complaints are coming to you.
Right. And that's a fair enough question. We've just had so many come in that we just haven't decided to count them and look at that. But that is something that we can look at.
You are counting the complaints.
Yeah.
This is really, for me, an amazing program, and I'm so glad that you're watching. We take a 1-minute break right now. We'll be back to pursue some more of the questions that were posed. We may not get through the 11, but we are up to number 4, so stay tuned when we come back in 1 minute.
KNXT, the nation's only full-powered broadcast station, owned and operated by a Catholic diocese in the U.S., and streaming live on the internet at KNXT.TV. Need your support to keep the message of the good news alive. Just go to KNXT.TV, click on the Make a Financial Gift, go to Donate, and fill out your one-time or monthly offering under PayPal. It's just that easy. Your donation makes it possible for KNXT, Catholic Television, to continue its ministry by celebrating the Mass and proclaiming the gospel. Thank you from KNXT.
Hello again, and welcome to the second part of our second program on the Office of Independent Review. We have looked at 3 questions. We have a 4th coming up right now. We want to have Eddie have the time it takes to answer the question and to have a chance for Gerry and for Rebecca to give us a response to his response. Let's see the 4th question, which comes to us from Kathy Mitchell who was at that meeting in December.
Mr. Aubrey, when there's a complaint filed on either a lieutenant or a deputy chief, who actually conducts the investigation? Is it their superior officers or someone in the lower chain of command?
What actually happens in usually there's not many complaints to like a deputy chief or a captain or anything like that. But when it does occur, Internal Affairs Bureau, not Internal Affairs out in the field or by a sergeant, but Internal Affairs Bureau, they actually are assigned that case, and they actually interview it. So a sergeant still would be interviewing that deputy chief or captain or lieutenant, but there would be the lieutenant who's in charge of internal affairs in that same interview, and depending on the circumstances, the deputy chief of professional accountability would be sitting in that interview. The thing about internal affairs, and that's why what they look at is so important, is they have the full authority of the chief of police to demand and order any officer within the department to go ahead and submit to interviews and answer questions. And they report directly to the deputy chief of internal affairs, and that chief reports directly to the chief. There is no other place that they report, so they have the full authority of that. And that's what I expect as a reviewer, to make sure that that line is directly to the chief and not going filtered in through other organizations or other chains of command.
Any commentary from the panel? Now, the fifth question from another one of the members of the CCCJC that evening is Richard Gomez. Let's see what Richard had for Eddie.
Great. Just before you were hired, Chief Dyer was talking about new programs to train his officers to be more civil to the people they encounter. How do we know these programs are working? How do we know they're effective?
The department is continuing to examine those things, and I've been made aware of the kinds of trainings or seminars or issues that they're looking at. For example, just in January, they sent 12 officers to a particular course about cultural awareness. And so they're looking at various different things. Now, normally, because of the peace officer standards and training, they have to go to a cultural awareness or cultural diversity every 2 years. It's mandated. They have to. And they have to go to an update. But the department is constantly looking at different programs to go ahead and look at. They're currently looking at one in Los Angeles that may be appropriate. But I get to go ahead and look and see exactly what's happening with the program and how it goes. How do we determine if it's effective? Well, that's where we get to look at the audits and see if there's a pattern of audits or pattern of cases with officers or officers that may constantly come up at times.
You know, before I ask the panel if they wanted to further ask anything more to Eddie, it'd be good to remind those who are joining our program exactly who our panel is today. So to my immediate left is Eddie Aubrey, who is the Office of Independent Review, the person that since November of 2009 has been the one overseeing the police department here in Fresno. To his side is Gerry Bill, a retired professor emeritus from City College here, and we're very glad that he's here again between trips. And across from me is Rebeca Rangel, a program manager with a youth empowerment program out of Kingsview Behavioral Services, and has been involved in this effort to bring oversight for the last 15 years of her life. So thank you very much for the commitments you each are making. Now to the point that Eddie just made about this chain of command issue, I wonder if there's anything, or is it super crystal clear?
I think we ought to move to the next question.
Move to the next question. Now, our next question, believe it or not, is one of the important questions because it brings up a word such as pattern. And let's hear from Vic McLean, who is a very important member of this wonderful committee.
Mr. Aubrey, are there officers who repeatedly feel threatened in situations where other officers would not feel threatened, and they are prone to use force in situations where the majority of other officers would not use force? Could your audits uncover patterns like this? If you did uncover such a pattern, how would the public know about it?
That's a very good question. Now, of course, the period of time we're talking about is the first 6 months. So at this point, I haven't seen that happen, but further audits could reveal a pattern that happens. And you have to look at the audits themselves to look at specifics in there, but then you look over a pattern. The department has what they call a early alert system, which is a variation of the early intervention system that's recommended in police accountability. And that particular system looks to see if there's a pattern of an officer, a specific officer, let's say Officer A, and Officer A has X number of incidents that occur within a period of 6 months. And it's a rolling 6 months. They just don't do 6 months and then that's it. We'll go on and wait for another 6 months. Once month 5 goes by or month 6, that drops off, and then they look at another 6 months, but still looking at the same time period. And when that Officer A's name pops up again, that's when Internal Affairs looks at it, asks questions, speaks with the officer, and looks to see that pattern. And that's what I get to see too, not only from that early alert system, but also doing the individual audits, because sometimes I may see that things fall into policy, but it may not be best practice. And I think we'll talk about that a little later.
Gerry and/or Rebecca, any further follow-up?
Yeah, just the last part of Vic's question was about if you did discover such a pattern, how would the public know about this, or would we know?
Yeah, I would write that into my annual reports, or specifically it would be in the audit reports. I'd make that recommendation. I'd write in there that, because the audit reports are specific to that case. And then in the annual report, that's where I list, well, there seems to be a systemic issue stemming from communication skills, because in these number of incidents, that a use of force was used, that maybe it could have prevented because of communication or sensitivity training that we were talking about earlier. And that's how you add up the whole thing and take a look at it.
Richard Gomez's next question is regarding checkpoints. And it's something I think that I'm very interested in finding out, actually, the answer to the question from Richard.
Mr. Aubrey, unless it's a DUI, someone who is stopped at a checkpoint is allowed to call someone else to drive their cars home instead of being towed away. How do we know, how do the people know that that policy is being practiced?
All right, thanks. Well, that's currently those are not, areas in the resolution that technically I look at, but I did take a look at it because I was informed of an issue like that. And I just checked on it, and at the checkpoints, about 40% of the cars that are towed are from the DUI arrest, of course, and that's mandated. But the other 60% that are towed are suspension or no license. The officer has to write down why the car is being towed. In particular, at the checkpoints, they have to write down why the car is being towed. And one of the things that they do there is, because it is a checkpoint, and at the checkpoint, they can go ahead and plan where it is. They know exactly where it is, that they can go ahead and legally park the car at the checkpoint because they can already figure out all the logistics on that. The other part of it is that they can go ahead and release the car at the checkpoint if they can get if there's a licensed driver, then they can go ahead and let the licensed driver take it away. The question comes to be, looking at the report, what does the report say? And then after that, then it's just a matter of saying, well, was that in fact what happened at the scene? And I think we had spoken about this a little earlier with the CCCJC and looking at that issue. And part of that issue is that one thing that might be something beneficial is being at some of the checkpoints to go ahead and see exactly what occurs, and I think that would be very beneficial.
Do you have any further questions about checkpoints and the whole procedure of what happens at them?
Well, I'm not sure that this is the time for it because I was talking to Eddie just a couple of minutes ago, and I'm still not satisfied with the answer that, for example, the chief told us that 80% of officers behind the wheel provided an electronic signature to the policy to prove that in fact they'd read the policy. However, that doesn't prove that the implementation and the follow-up that they're actually practicing that policy is being enforced. That's the $64 question here. Eddie was at CCCJC, Central California Criminal Justice Committee meeting, I don't know, a couple of 3 weeks ago, and we had an individual sitting there with a brand new recent incident, a few days old, where he witnessed an officer stopping a family, and he said he sat there or stood there at the bus stop and listened to the whole incident, and never once did the officer indicate to the family that they could call somebody to have their car driven away, and that this individual even went over and talked to the family and asked, did the officer inform you of your rights? And the people in the vehicle looked at each other and said, no, he did not. So we know that there are officers on the street not honoring this policy, and it is a bone of contention. Yes, we could go and be at the checkpoint and observe if in fact police are informing people of their rights, but let's be honest here. If we're there observing, what do you think the police are going to do? I mean, come on. You think they're going to inform people because that's why we're there. So we mean, generally speaking, across the board, how do we know? It still remains. One person said, Rebecca, you just have to trust. Well, I don't think so, because we still, once again, have people coming forward saying, no, I didn't know somebody could drive my car away. This is not one isolated incident. It continues to pop up. So,
Anything more, Gerry, on this?
No, Rebecca is the
and
expert on this
actually,
topic.
just one more baby comment about that. I did talk to Captain Hall. In fact, I think Eddie told me he'd said this, and then, or it was an email, one of the two. And Captain Hall, who's in charge of traffic, did say that they're starting to leave vehicles by the side of the road. If a person doesn't have somebody to drive their vehicle away and want the vehicle left on the side of the road, that they're doing that, which I thought was great. If it's a safe neighborhood, of course. I'm not talking about, left in someplace random where it's going to be vandalized.
I can't believe that we not only have 4 more questions to ask, but we have like 30 seconds to ask them in, so we can't do them. We want you to know how we have tried to bring today a very interesting forum to your attention, and we hope that you will be following up with the OIR. And I wonder if Gerry can tell us one thing they could do, and then Eddie, you're not going to have that chance, guys. I'm really sorry. We have 30 seconds, and I'm going to say, if you are wanting to be in touch with the station, okay? And we will follow up this with Eddie, with the CCCJC, because this is too important. We may actually, who knows, make one more program about this wonderful issue of what we're doing with the OIR in the Fresno Police Department. Till next week, God bless.